You cannot sit here. This is first class, not a bus stop." The words rang out across the cabin, sharp enough to slice through the chatter. Heads turned. An older woman stood frozen in the aisle, clutching her frayed purse, eyes lowered. The flight attendant's smile was thin and tight. "Please step aside." Laughter bubbled from a few seats nearby. No one offered help. No one asked questions. She turned slowly, heart pounding, unaware of who was watching from just a few rows away. "Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Comment below." Margaret Taylor's fingers trembled as she zipped up the sides of her old suitcase. The fabric was faded, the handle fraying, but it had been with her through every chapter: birthdays, funerals, moves, and memories. She wiped the corners of her glasses and looked once more around her quiet Ohio apartment. Her daughter Amanda was waiting in Dallas, and Margaret had promised she would finally visit. At the airport, she clutched her boarding pass like it was a precious letter. Everything felt big and rushed. The buzz of rolling suitcases, the screech of intercoms, the click of polished heels on tile floors. She tried not to stare at the other passengers, dressed sharp and confident. She wore her best blouse, soft blue with tiny flowers, tucked into high-waisted jeans. Her brown cardigan had holes at the cuffs, but it was warm. At the gate, the airline agent scanned her ticket, then blinked. "Looks like we are upgrading you to first class today, Mrs. Taylor." Margaret blinked too. "Oh, well, are you sure?" she asked. The agent smiled. "Yes, it happens sometimes." Margaret nodded slowly, unsure if it was a mistake. But she accepted the slip of paper with her new seat, 2A, and whispered a thank you before shuffling toward the jet bridge. Inside the plane, the lighting was soft, the seats wide. She paused, counting the rows, gripping the back of each chair as she passed. When she reached the second row, she stopped, confused. A young woman with perfect hair stood nearby, watching. Margaret looked again at the numbers above. Yes, this was it. 2A. She smiled shyly. "Excuse me, I believe this is my seat." The flight attendant's smile did not reach her eyes. "I do not think so," she said, folding her arms. "This is first class." Margaret nodded. "Yes, they gave me." She lifted her pass to show her. The attendant snatched it, glanced at it, and frowned. "This must be a mistake. I will need you to return to the main cabin while I check this." Margaret opened her mouth, then closed it. The passengers nearby had stopped reading their magazines. One man stared over his sunglasses. A woman in a pearl necklace smirked. I can just go back there," Margaret whispered, pointing behind her. "It is fine." The attendant gave a curt nod and waved her away. "Thank you for understanding." As Margaret turned, she could feel the weight of every eye. Her cheeks burned, and the soft hum of the engine seemed to grow louder. No one spoke. No one reached out. She moved slowly down the aisle, holding her purse to her chest. Far behind her, a man in a charcoal suit closed his laptop and watched the scene unfold in silence. His eyes did not blink. His hand curled into a slow fist on the armrest. He knew her, and she did not even know he was there. Not yet. Margaret took the last seat in the back row, near the bathroom. The cushion sagged. The air felt heavy. Her knees nearly touched the seat in front of her, and the scent of stale coffee mixed with something sour. She folded her hands in her lap, trying not to cry. The man beside her reeked of cologne and cigarette smoke. He coughed loudly without covering his mouth. A crying baby shrieked 2 rows ahead, its mother bouncing and whispering, eyes wild with exhaustion. Margaret stared at the small square window, but there was nothing to see. The sun was still rising. In first class, Candace was stirring creamer into her coffee. Her lips curled as she told another flight attendant. She walked in like she belonged there. Some people really think a cardigan makes them royalty. The other attendant gave a half smile but said nothing. She was probably lost, Candace added, brushing imaginary lint from her sleeve. "Happens all the time. You give them a little kindness, and they take a mile." In the back, Margaret reached into her purse and pulled out a photo, worn and soft from years of handling. It was her son, Peter, dressed in his army uniform, standing tall and proud in front of their house. He had been gone for 8 years now. She blinked slowly, pressing her fingers to her lips. Then she tucked the photo away and closed her eyes. A few seats away, a businessman in his 50s noticed her. He had watched her be sent back with quiet disapproval. He nudged his glasses up and shook his head. Meanwhile, the cockpit intercom buzzed. The co-pilot leaned closer, listening. "We have a passenger on the manifest flag for executive alert," a voice said. He looked confused. "Executive alert." "Yeah," the voice came again. "Top-level exec flying anonymously. Someone from corporate. Needs discreet attention." The co-pilot turned to the captain. "One of the big guys is on board." The captain nodded. "Curious. Let us figure out who it is." Back in row 34, Margaret leaned her head against the window and whispered a prayer she had not spoken in years. "Lord, help me stay small and kind." In seat 2C, the man in the charcoal suit closed his eyes, but his jaw was tight. His name was Daniel Pierce, the founder and chairman of the airline. And the woman who had just been humiliated, she was his wife. His crew had no idea, but he had seen everything. He had watched her be dismissed like she was invisible. He had not said a word. Not yet. He looked down at the leather band of his watch. His flight plan was about to change. And Candace? She was still laughing softly in the galley, pouring herself another drink, not knowing who she had just insulted, or what would be waiting for her before this plane touched the ground. Have you ever seen someone treated like they did not matter? The cockpit door clicked open. Captain Rhodes stepped out, eyes scanning first class. His gait was steady, but there was tension in his shoulders. The message had come directly from corporate. Someone powerful was on this flight. Not just someone important. Someone untouchable. He moved down the aisle slowly, making small talk with a few passengers, watching their reactions. Then he saw the man in 2C. The suit, the silence, the unmistakable weight of presence. Daniel Pierce looked up, nodded once. The captain nodded back, then leaned in close. "Mr. Pierce." "Sir?" "I was not aware." Daniel spoke without emotion. "You were not meant to be. But something needed to be corrected." Captain Rhodes hesitated. "Is it Candace?" Daniel said nothing, but his eyes said everything. The captain turned, walked briskly to the galley, and called Candace aside. Her smile was still painted on. "Yes, Captain. Come with me, please." She followed, confused but still composed. When she saw Daniel, her steps slowed. "Mr. Pierce, sir, I did not realize you were on board." Daniel looked at her calmly. "You sent a passenger to the back, an elderly woman. Do you remember her?" Candace's mouth opened, then closed. Yes, sir." She was in the wrong seat. "First classes." Daniel interrupted, his tone sharp but quiet. She was not in the wrong seat. Candace paled. "There was an upgrade error. I assumed." "You assumed based on what you saw, not what you knew." He stood, and even at eye level, he felt taller. "Where is she now?" Candace could barely answer. Daniel turned to the captain. "I want her brought back up." A minute later, the entire plane seemed to shift as Captain Rhodes made his way to the rear. Passengers watching confusion as he stopped at row 34. "Mrs. Taylor," he said softly, "would you mind joining me?" Margaret blinked. I am fine here." He smiled gently. "You were meant for a better seat." She hesitated, then slowly rose. Whispers followed her as she walked up the aisle again, but this time with the captain beside her. When she reached first class, she saw Daniel standing. She froze. "Daniel." He smiled. "It is all right." Margaret looked around, embarrassed. "I did not want to cause trouble." "You did not," he said, taking her hand. "Please sit." Candace stood stiff as a board, her face drained of color. Daniel turned to her once more. "She is not just my wife. She is a person, and no one deserves to be treated like they are furniture." Candace stammered something, but the words were broken. "Return to the galley," Daniel said. "You will not be serving this flight any longer." The silence in the cabin was thick. Even the air felt still. Candace walked off, every step heavier than the last. Margaret sat down slowly in 2A, glancing around nervously. "I do not want to be a problem," she whispered. You are not, Daniel said gently. You are the reason I built all this. Across the aisle, a woman who had laughed earlier now turned her eyes down, ashamed. And behind them, the whispers continued. But now, they were about the man with power who defended the woman no one had seen. Until now, Candace stood frozen near the galley door, hands clenched behind her back. She could hear the murmurs floating through the cabin. She had handled hundreds of passengers before, dismissed dozens without blinking. But this time, her legs felt weak. Daniel sat back in his seat, hand resting gently on Margaret's. The motion of the plane had steadied, but something inside him was still burning. Are you sure this was necessary? Margaret asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He turned toward her. What happened back there, that was not just a mistake. That was a pattern. You just happened to be the one person I love most in this world. Margaret looked down at her lap. I did not want anyone to feel small. And you never made anyone feel that way, he said. That is why I married you. 12 years ago, they had met in a quiet town library. Daniel was on the board for a local charity. Margaret had come to return her late husband's books. She apologized for being late and left cookies for the staff. She never asked who Daniel was, never treated him like someone to impress. When he asked her out, she hesitated. When he told her who he was, she smiled and said, I like you better without the suit. They had married the next year. No press, no announcement. She refused to live in his estate. Instead, she chose a small apartment where the neighbors knew her name, and the grocery store still used handwritten price signs. Daniel chose privacy because she valued it. But this moment required something else. The captain returned quietly to his seat. Word had already reached the ground team. There would be a report, a review, consequences. In the jump seat, Candace finally sat down, breathing hard. Her fingers trembled as she opened a small pack of tissues. Another attendant passed her without a word. Back in 2A, Margaret leaned closer to Daniel. Do not punish her because of me. He looked at her. I am not punishing her because of you. I am holding her accountable because of what she did. Margaret sighed. People make assumptions. I have done it, too. He gave her a soft smile. You may assume things, but you never humiliate people. Her eyes filled for a moment, then cleared. I just wanted to visit Amanda. That is all. And you will. But first, we finish this flight. A crew member arrived quietly with tea and a warm blanket. Margaret accepted both with a quiet thank you. Across from her, a younger woman who had once looked annoyed now gave a soft nod of respect. The silence around them was no longer awkward, it was reverent. Candace sat with her head bowed. For the first time in her career, she realized she had looked at someone and seen only what they wore, not who they were. And across the aisle, Daniel Pierce, the man who built the empire she worked for, had seen everything, and remembered every second, without raising his voice, without ever needing to say who he was. Would you have stepped in if you saw this happen right in front of you? The flight sailed through the clouds in silence, but the atmosphere had shifted. Every crew member moved with quiet precision now, their eyes flicking nervously toward first class and the man who no longer needed to introduce himself. Daniel tapped his phone twice. A secure airline app opened. With a few measured swipes, he filed a formal in-flight report directly to the airline's executive control team. He did not write it with anger, just facts. Passenger improperly removed from assigned first-class seat. No verification. Behavior publicly humiliating. Crew member, Candace Miller. Immediate review requested. Recommendation, disciplinary leave pending retraining. He hit send. In the jump seat, Candace's headset buzzed. She adjusted it with shaking fingers. The voice on the other end was clipped and professional. Crew member Miller, this is Dispatch 1. You are being relieved of service on this flight. Please remain seated and cooperate with remaining staff. Her throat tightened. Relieved, she whispered, but there was no reply. A moment later, the lead flight attendant approached, eyes careful. Candace, please step into the rear cabin and secure yourself. You will not be serving the remainder of this flight. Candace blinked, stunned. This is because of her. The attendant's voice softened. No, this is because of you. Candace stood slowly, back straight, and walked toward the rear. Every step echoed. The passengers she had once served now refused to meet her eyes. Margaret watched her go, sadness flickering in her face. She looked so young, she whispered. So angry. Daniel touched her hand gently. Some people do not learn until they are stopped. Another attendant brought Margaret a fresh tea and folded her blanket again, more gently this time. The service had changed, not because of fear, but out of something deeper. Respect, humility, awareness. A little boy in row 3 peeked over the seat, staring at Margaret. His mother whispered for him to stop, but Margaret smiled and waved. The boy waved back. Daniel leaned toward her. You have always had that effect on people. Margaret shook her head. I do not want people to fear me because of you. They do not, Daniel replied. They respect you because you stayed kind, even when you had every right not to. The sun outside the window began to dip, casting golden light across the cabin. It softened the lines on Margaret's face, turned her silver hair almost white. Passengers began to whisper less. Some sat straighter. A few looked out the windows, lost in thought. Up front, the captain made an announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our descent into Dallas. On behalf of the crew, thank you for flying with us. Candace sat alone now, near the back, staring at the seat back in front of her. Her hands were still, her mind loud. In seat 2A, Margaret reached for Daniel's hand again. He laced his fingers through hers without a word. The world outside was still the same. But inside this aircraft, something had shifted. Not just in the air, in the way people saw, in the way people listened. And one quiet woman, dressed in a cardigan and grace, had reminded them all what dignity truly looked like. The wheels touched down with a soft thud, the plane slowing as the runway rushed by beneath them. The passengers sat in stillness, as if the air held something sacred now. No one rushed to stand. No one pushed the front. Daniel stood first, then turned and reached for Margaret's hand. She rose slowly, gathering her small purse. There was nothing flashy about her, no designer bag, no loud colors, but every eye followed her as she walked down the aisle. Some passengers nodded. One older man in business class even whispered, with a gentle tip of his head. She nodded back, too kind to ignore him, too humble to acknowledge the shift in tone. At the jet bridge, 2 airline executives waited quietly. They greeted Daniel with respect, but his expression told them to stay focused. This is my wife, Margaret, he said. You will treat her with the same care you give your most valued guests, because that is what every person here should receive, regardless of seat, clothing, or title. They nodded, and the crew, one of them asked quietly, review their files. Ret rein everyone. Lead with empathy. But the one in the back, Candace, she is to be placed on leave immediately. No termination, the exec asked. Daniel glanced at Margaret. She shook her head once. Let her alone. Daniel nodded. Leave, not a firing. If she changes, give her a second chance. The executives agreed, then stepped aside as Daniel and Margaret exited quietly through a side corridor. Outside, the sun was just beginning to set. The gold of it spilled across the concrete. A private car waited for them by the curb. As the driver loaded her suitcase into the trunk, Margaret reached for Daniel's arm and smiled. You always do too much. He raised an eyebrow. That was me doing the bare minimum. She laughed softly, then leaned her head against his shoulder as they slid into the back seat. That night, at Amanda's house, the family gathered for dinner. Amanda hugged her mother tightly at the door, not knowing anything yet. Grandkids tugged at Margaret's sleeve, excited to see her. Laughter filled the rooms. Margaret never mentioned the flight. Not at the table. Not even when Amanda asked how it went. But later that evening, after the house quieted down and the children were in bed, Margaret stepped out onto the porch. The Texas air was warm. Crickets sang in the brush. She held a cup of tea, looked out across the dockyard, and let her thoughts breathe. People judge quickly. They see shoes, wrinkles, clothes, and they decide everything in one glance. But kindness, real kindness, still has a place in this world. Daniel came out a moment later, sitting beside her on the old porch swing. He said nothing, just handed her a blanket and pulled it over her legs. "I do not need rescuing," she whispered. "I know," he said, "but sometimes I need reminding." She reached for his hand again. The world may have its loudness, its cruelty, but hey, in this quiet corner, she was seen, not as a passenger, not as a symbol, but simply as herself. And that was enough. Always had been, always would be,